Mike Demergis here, along with an alum of Iona College and Mass Comm in particular, Kayla Coughlin. Kayla, we're coming upon the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and that's something that's very dear to you. As I got to know you at Iona College, you lost your father on 9/11 20 years ago, and this date must really impact you and your family.
Yes. So yeah, my father was Sergeant John Coughlin. He was in the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. He worked in the Bronx, but of course, on September 11th that day, it was a full mobilization for the NYPD and, of course, all other first responders in New York City. And yeah, my father went down that day, never came home. So yeah, September, this time of year is just the worst time of year. It's a great time to remember, but it's also, as summer comes to an end, you're just kind of hoping, like, okay, here we go again. We're gonna pull through it.
And talk about that day in particular. What do you remember from that day?
So I was 6 years old. My sisters and I, my oldest sister Erin was 16, my sister Tara was 13, and I was 6. So it was my first week of first grade. A lot of people will talk about, that day, oh, I was taken home from school and they made an announcement. Like, they didn't tell us, which I understand. We were first graders. So I went about my day totally normal, excited to be there, first grade. I got home that day, got off the bus, and usually like I said, my sisters are 16 and 13. Usually when you open the door, it was loud and they were like joking around or fighting or whatever, and it was dead silent. And I was like, okay. I walked up the stairs and I saw they were watching the news, and I was like, who watches the news? Like, why aren't we watching something fun? And I saw it on TV, and I just remember insanely somber mood in my house. My sisters were dead silent and we're not quiet people. And I just finally asked, like, what's wrong? And my sister said, so many people are dying. And at first, when I saw the footage, being innocent, I was like, well, when there's a fire in a building, everybody gets out. And it never occurred to me that people didn't have time to get out, or the people above the crash area didn't get out. And then the footage kept playing and I saw people jumping, and I just was like, but even in my little kid mind, so my dad was ESU, and one of the things that they did, they do all the big jobs in the NYPD, and like one of the things is they actually um, help stop people who are, trying to jump to take their life. They will step in and try to stop them. And one of the things that they utilize is an airbag, to offer a soft landing. So even in my mind, I was like, there's probably airbags. Everybody's fine. But then again, like, it just got, they would not cheer up, like, in my mind. And I looked at my sister and she was like, daddy's down there. And I was nervous for a second, but then I was just like, well, that's great. Actually, it's great. Daddy's there and he's the best police officer in the world. So daddy's going to make everything okay. Like, it's a good thing that he's there. Um, Unbeknownst to me at that time, this was hours later. I got home at like 3 p.m. At that age. My father had been dead for hours. He was later that night. My mom received a phone call from the job that he was listed among the missing. She told us what that could mean. She said it's a huge mess down there. It could mean that they just haven't found him. They're like, the radios are messed up, phones are messed up. It's a whole mess. A lot of people were listed missing that ended up being okay. They were found. She said it could mean that he's at a hospital. She never said what else it could mean, but we just said, okay. Um, we waited for about a week. My mom spent a lot of times down at police headquarters in that time, waiting for information, waiting for updates. Her and all the other widows and widower, Jim Smith, waited there. And finally, a week later, my mom, when there was no sign of my father and she understood the destruction that had happened there, she had my father declared dead. So his last radio call was heard on the 20th floor of Tower 2. He was in the stairwell and he was calling over for harnesses. So I know that, he had made it that high into the building. So it sounded like, he died with his boots on and just yeah, just doing the job that he loved.
And then how did you deal with everything in the ensuing days as the world was watching, the world was focused on the World Trade Center disaster, and for the better part of a month it was like that. And, how did your mother deal with this young family in those ensuing days?
Yeah, it was for us too. It went past a month. It felt like almost like 2, 3 years for a bit, and I'll explain why. But my mom, both my parents were really strong, independent people that had a great partnership. And my mom knew that my dad had a dangerous job. They discussed it. Actually, just a year earlier, in August of 2000, there was an awful shootout that the emergency service unit was involved in. And my dad got a scare, and they just, they discussed this, and like it was a reality check for them. So it's one of those things you never, ever, ever want it to happen, but it is something as the wife of a police officer that this could happen. Um, she relied, and they relied on us too. The guys that worked with my dad, we all became a family. We all grieved together because the NYPD lost 23 members that day. 14 of them were from the emergency service unit, which is a very tight knit group of people. Even though they all work in different trucks, they're all trained together. They're all really tight. So we all leaned on each other. We became very, very tight with the different cops that worked with my dad, their families too. Like they're like cousins to me now. We're all very close. So that we relied on that. My mom just focused on being honest with us. If there was something, like I said, there was so much unknown that like she would go down to one police plaza to get information that a lot of times they didn't have. It was such a mess down there. And I don't think people properly understand that. Like it, no rhyme or reason into anything. It was a dust cloud. It was a smoke cloud for months and months. So like my mom would be honest. If we'd ask a question, she would say, I don't know. She would tell us what she did know. Honesty was key with us. We needed to trust her, and she needed us to trust her. So that's just what we focused on. My mother's family stepped in a lot. My aunt was there. My grandmother was there. We were always very tight. And then, like I was saying about how it was longer than a month, a lot of people also don't remember is that the NYPD was also stationed at the morgue and Fresh Kills landfill. So yes, the pile closed in late spring, early summer of 2002, but the morgue continued on for a very long time, and Fresh Kills landfill also. So we sort of became this like beacon for the people working there, the cops working there and doing that dig and that awful work. When any time they would get just exhausted, either emotionally or physically, they would remember, they're like, no, this is who we're doing it for. This, we need to provide them with some kind of closure was their big thing. So many cops would also just look at us and think how their family could have been in the exact same position, which is so true for September 11th. Like you went right instead of left and somehow made it. So many people could have been in our situation. So because of that, they really were just so available emotionally, and they were just such a good support to us and still are.
And talk about that emotional toll that the cops went through at that time. You going down there, you're relating to them, and the emotional toll that they were going through.
So the issue of first responders is so many people, what's like special about them, I guess, in an awful way, is so many people that were there on 9/11, they experienced hell that day and then didn't have to go back. Um, which is great. You shouldn't have to. They had to go back. A lot of them wanted to go back. They felt the need to go back. They are the people, a lot of people don't always like to portray them this way, but they are the people that help. They have it in them innately. It is trained in them. I've spoken with so many first responders that day, and they actually talk about the worst part of 9/11 was when the buildings collapsed and it was just blackness around them. They could hear people screaming for help and they couldn't get to them. And that was the worst part. It wasn't that they got hurt or something like that. It was, oh my gosh, these people need help. I can't find them. Um, firemen and Port Authority had said the same thing. Like, that is unimaginable to me, that knowing that that personality can't do what they were basically born to do. Um, so that, like, you think of all of that hell that they went through that day, then pile on top that their friends died. Their friends died. And they have to go and work this pile and find their friends. And they're not finding perfect bodies, you know. It's wasn't this pretty sight. A lot of times they would find fragments. I have friends who their loved ones have been recovered, and they've still had to open up the casket about 7 times after that because more and more pieces kept being found. So this is something that they were going through every day. Um, but the whole country was looking to the NYPD, the FDNY, the Port Authority. They were looking to them to be our strength. Um, they were this beacon of hope. They were the, you know, the idols of just heroism and strength through that, and they had to carry that on their back too. Um, they also had to leave their families and go home. I can't imagine what it was like for the family members who, oh my gosh, my loved one made it home. And then they're turning around and saying, okay, now I'm going back. And like, you probably didn't want to let them go. Like, but they did. They probably missed them too. And I can't imagine what it's like for, like, your business then is just death. And to deal with that, like, I spoke to one cop who worked the morgue on Christmas Eve. It was that day he worked the morgue, and then later that night he had to go home to his family and play Santa Claus for his nieces. That was life. And they did it. They did it very well. They managed and they worked through it. But the whole time they were dealing with their own trauma, the death of their friends, seeing so many people not found. A lot of times they had strangers coming. A lot of the cops had to work the armory, where they would collect samples of people who were missing, like hairbrushes, toothbrushes, something with DNA. And they would have these strangers just coming up saying, like, have you seen my daughter? Have you seen, like, and they just had to live through that. And all they could say is, we're trying. Like, the fact that, like, there's just so many details that people don't think about with 9/11. They think it was just that day, but it was months and months and months of hell every day and just death in their face every day. But they still wanted to do that job. They wanted to be there because it's, what else could they do? They were so helpless, but they could do this. And also at the same time, they were dealing with exhaustion and they were dealing with the awful exposure to those elements, like awful exposure that, you know, with all that dust and all that burning jet fuel.
You know, this, you say it goes on, and you know, people watch it on TV that didn't lose somebody, but this is a lifetime experience for you. How long was it before you were able to go down to the World Trade Center, and you know, show your respect to where your father lost your life?
It's I have a very interesting relationship with Ground Zero. I didn't see it in person. My sisters were taken down um, a few weeks after my father was declared dead, just so that my mom, again, in the understanding of trust, my mom wanted them to see, they also wanted to see exactly what it looked like. So that when she said, I don't know what's going on, they could see, oh, wow, okay. And also get an appreciation for just the work being done. Um, I was not taken on that trip because I was 6. I was there the first anniversary in 2002, September 11, 2002, and it was just this. It was crazy. It still was just a complete dust bowl. Like, it was ground zero, and we were in the very bottom, you know, underneath, you know, where the pools are now. We were under that, and we were standing there, and George Bush came down and said hello to us, and that was great. And all these other politicians came and met us. It was a madhouse. But at that point, we were still pretty numb. But I do remember a lot of numbness in that time. You're just in autopilot. Um, the second anniversary, I would say I was more emotional. I remember crying a lot the second anniversary when I was 8. Um, because then I think I was able to step back, like a full year had properly passed, and I was able to step back and just comprehend everything I had been through, everything that happened at this place, and more importantly, again, everything that the other cops and firemen, like I was able to read the emotion on their face, and that's when it really sunk in, just what happened to all of these people, including my dad, including my family, including all the families around me. The magnitude of it really sunk in.
And of course, we're talking about your father, John. Kayla Coughlin lost her father, John, the NYPD Sergeant on 2001. And certainly at some point, your mother has to raise her family, and life has to go on. Uh, how did how did your family go about that as the years went on and you became a teenager? Maybe in some ways it was a blessing you were young enough, still a kid, but not too young where you didn't remember it. But the initial shock wouldn't have been the case as with your sister Erin, going through something like that, who was a teenager. How did you guys go on?
The shock, that's I do actually want to commend my mom in that sense, that the three of us were treated equally in how we were told. My mom sat all three of us down at the same time and explained to us what happened, that our dad wasn't coming home. And I also, a blessing and a curse, I have a very, very good memory. So um, I remember the great parts of my dad, but I also remember completely the awful moment where she told us that he was dead. Um, so navigating that, and like you said, I was 6. I was in first grade, and I can remember the first time I went back into school. A bunch of my friends came up to me, and of course, with first graders, they're sweet, and it was the first time I felt disconnected from people my own age. I just was on a different level of consciousness. I don't know, maturity. And I remember my friend, she was a sweetie. She came up to me and she said, I remember when my pop died. I was so sad. And like another kid said, I remember when my dog died. I was so sad. Like, and I was like, thank you. Like, that's sweet. And I remember coming home and telling my mom, and I was like, that's not what I feel like. And she was like, no, Kayla, it's not what you feel like. It's not the same. But she was like, what did you say to them? I was like, I just said thank you because they were being nice. And she was like, okay, yeah. She was like, and stuff like that happened again later in life. Just I was on a different maturity level than my friends. Middle school was tough because I was not feeling the same feelings other middle school girls are feeling. If I didn't get Justin Bieber tickets, it was not the end of the world. Like, people would come in all the time, like, I hate my parents, they won't let me go see this or that. And I'm just like, why? Like, and like freaking out, acting like this is the end of the world. This is the worst thing to ever happen to them. And I was just like, I like, I would get so frustrated with my friends all the time. It was hard for me to keep deep friendships until I got into like later high school, and everybody else had kind of caught up to me in terms of things that could have happened in their lives. Um, Sports were a big part of bonding for me. My dad was an athlete himself. He loved to support my sisters and I. Me a little bit less. I hadn't really gotten fully into sports by the time he died, but it was a good way to like bond with my friends without having to be too social and talkative. And then in terms of just like how did we continue, my dad never left in our minds. We do believe in heaven and that type of thing. And to this day, we still talk about my dad as if he's still around. Like, my mom will point out when we're acting like him, if we, do something that he would find funny. We'll like, somebody will say something dumb and we'll be like, oh, like, what daddy would say if he was here right now. And like, we'll just throw that right at him. So we've kept going in terms of like we'll miss him and it'll hurt a lot at certain moments, but then we remember he's here. He is with us. He makes his presence known in his own way a lot. Um, we do believe in stuff like that. So that's how we keep going. I recently actually 2 years ago, I was moving my mom out of her house and I found my dad's hundreds of books that he had. And I actually found a book. I was going to donate it. I didn't want it. And then at the last second, I was like, okay, let me keep this. And I started reading it. And it ended up being the sequel to this other book that I had lost years ago. And I didn't even know there was a sequel. And I realized reading it that it had been torn and worn. And I was like, oh my gosh, my dad must have loved this book. And it was like a suspenseful book. It was like a murder mysteries type of thing, which again, usually isn't my genre. But of course there's twists and turns and things that you don't see coming. And as like the twists would reveal themselves, I would think like, oh my gosh, I wonder if you saw that coming when you read this. So it was this great continuation of our relationship, because for so long my only relationship with my father was I was 6 years old and he was daddy, and we played, and the last thing he did was like teach me how to ride a bike. Like that was as far as we got in life as a father and daughter. But then I was able to like have this like academic literature connection with him as an adult, reading this adult book. Like that was a cool development. So I'm always like looking out for if stuff like that should happen. Like if I find a movie that I turns out he actually loved that movie, it's like, oh, we have this adult connection now.
What are some of the things you hold on to that it might be his, like his hat or his, maybe buttons or merits and stuff like that? When you lose somebody, it's very hard. You want to hold on to everything, but you can't. I've experienced loss in my life, and it certainly changes you. Like you said, some people can be real petty until they lose somebody, then they fully understand you. When you laugh, you don't laugh as hard. You cry, and you go to special events and your family's not there, so you miss that person. What is it that you, your sister, and your mom hold on to of your dad?
In terms of the physical, we actually don't hold on to that much. We do have his stuff, but we've always held off on like displaying his things. We have it, we have them safe. Maybe one day I find a way to display it. Um, but we just keep him alive in our everyday conversation. I I do have like a few of the things. I have this old John Wayne poster that he had, which he loved, and like I'll keep that. But we keep him alive. We go to, my father was a Marine as well as being a cop. So Toys for Tots every year. He was huge into Toys for Tots when he was alive. Our house was a donation site actually, and he put us all to work. It was basically child labor when he was alive. So we are very big on Toys for Tots every year. Like we keep his traditions alive. Our big summer trip as children was going to Lake George. It's mainly, I guess it would be experiences. It's going to places that he went and feeling him there. We couldn't quite hold on to the tactile physical stuff as much as I think other people would, because what's unique about our case is none of his remains were ever found. Nothing was found. They are still looking to this day. Actually, just a few years ago, we got a phone call. They thought that they found his St. Michael's medal. They didn't. So very early on, we had to be okay with not having physical. He does not have a grave. His final resting place is the World Trade Center. And we just decided in that moment, okay, well, he's always with us. So that's how we act. It's okay that he doesn't have a grave. His name is on the, Federal Police Memorial down in Washington, D.C. It's all over the world in memorials. It's at Battery Park. So that we're okay with. But yeah, we mainly look for my father in experiences, in feelings that we have. And that's how he's just always with us.
Well, I just want you to know every September 11th, I do think of you when you told me the story that you lost your dad. So I do think of you. In particular, as the years go on, people seem to forget 9/11, and we should never forget 9/11 because so many people, it changed the world, but people lost somebody they love like you did. And it's kind of weird to checking the New York Post, and I'm scrolling down. I'm like, I know that girl. So talk about the article that was in the New York Post. You and your sister Erin were featured in it, and share how that experience happened and came up.
So the New York Post reached out to my sister and I both work in the NYPD. My sister Erin, she's the oldest sister. She's a cop. She works in community partnerships within the NYPD. I have been a video producer with the NYPD since 2018. I mainly work on training videos, person of interest stories, event coverage. Yeah, so we've been working there, and the New York Post and a number of other news outlets reached out to the NYPD asking about different people who are the children of line of duty deaths from 9/11. Are they on the job? A lot of them are. So they requested that they get to interview us. So my sister and I were both interviewed by the New York Post, and we just, basically like this. We talked about my dad, life since then. And my sister also mentioned that her husband, who she actually met when she was a rookie, they were rookies like kind of together. Her husband's also a cop, and now he is in ESU. He is in ESU K9, and he has Coughlin, the dog, who is named after my father. He goes by Coggy for short. But they sent out a photographer. They came to police headquarters where we work, and we spent like 3 hours doing a photo shoot. I mixed up the days. For some reason, I thought it was going to be Friday. It was actually Thursday. So I had to run out to Rite Aid like 15 minutes before, throw my hair together, throw some makeup on, and I was ready to go. But it was, yeah, my sister, me, and it was really exciting to have my brother-in-law and Coughlin, the dog, come into the fold. And just another great way to honor my dad's legacy. And we think it's just so cool that Coughlin is on the job, is my brother-in-law's dog. He lives with my brother-in-law, my sister, and her kids. That was getting to talk about him. That's really cool. It's like my dad is still serving to this day on the job. That's a cool legacy.
Well, Kayla, thank you so much for joining us for these few minutes. You were a pleasure to have as a student. Again, I do think of you on the anniversary of 9/11. So I just wanted you to know that you've made Iona proud. You're proud, Gail. And, when you finish that documentary, you're going to show it at Iona, right?
Oh yes, absolutely. Absolutely.